Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, have you ever considered the possibility that long before mammals, maybe even before the mighty dinosaurs, massive giants actually walked the Earth? It sounds wild, right? But the sources we're digging into today propose exactly this. They claim that gigantic beings weren't just real, but were basically the original rulers of our planet. And the craziest part? The sources suggest these beings didn't just disappear, they were transformed by time into the very landscapes we see all around us today. It's a completely fascinating, perspective-shifting concept. Okay, let's dive into this. Did giants rule the Earth before us? Now, our goal in this explainer isn't to take sides or tell you what to believe. We're just here to systematically, neutrally investigate the specific evidence our sources are putting on the table for this incredible theory. We're going to break down their arguments step by step because we really want to understand exactly why some researchers believe these colossal figures were a literal historical reality and not just bedtime stories. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at myths and ancient texts. Then, petrified giants in landscapes. After that, massive artifacts and relics. And finally, uncovering giant remains.
All right, Section 1, Myths and Ancient Texts, the Universal Lore.
The whole foundation of this argument really leans on global lore. The sources point out that stories of giants aren't just popping up in one isolated region. The global footprint of these claims is absolutely massive. We're talking Hebrew and Greek texts, Sumerian wall paintings, and major religious texts like the Bible and the Quran, all mentioning these giant beings. But what the source material really highlights are Egyptian museum paintings. These artworks are specifically called out because they don't just show one big figure on their own. No, they allegedly depict colossal giants standing right next to normal-sized humans. The sources argue this wasn't an artistic accident. It was a highly intentional visual distinction, capturing two entirely different species coexisting at the exact same time.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the sources anchor these claims in very specific cultural histories. The material pulls directly from ancient Hindu epics to make this point. Figures like Ghatotkacha from the Mahabharata and Kumbhakarna from the Ramayana. Well, the sources say they aren't just mythological characters invented to spice up a story. They are presented as actual historical giant beings who lived, fought, and walked right alongside normal humans. For the folks backing this theory, these global texts are basically literal historical records, not just collective imagination.
Moving on to Section 2, Petrified Giants in Landscapes, the Geological Argument.
Now, shifting our focus from ancient texts to the natural world, the sources present a seriously fascinating geological claim. They argue that these ancient giants didn't just die and decompose in the dirt like the rest of us. Instead, over millions of years, time and the elements literally turned them to stone. According to this theory, a lot of the mountains and massive rock formations we hike on today are actually the petrified remains of these colossal beings. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this specific mountain formation in New Zealand. The source suggests that if you look at it horizontally, you kind of have to completely change your perspective. A distinct face emerges. You can clearly trace what looks like a nose, a mouth, and closed eyes. For proponents of this theory, this is no coincidence of wind and erosion. It's the petrified face of a giant from the unimaginably distant past.
And this geological argument? It spans the globe. Deep in the dense jungles of Peru, the sources claim you can find massive, human-like faces that look remarkably like giant creatures just peering right out from the dense foliage. Similarly, they point us over to mountain structures in Thailand that resemble a perfectly carved face, or even a massive giant lying on its side, asleep, turned to stone by the relentless passage of time. The sheer volume of these formations worldwide is presented as proof that we aren't just looking at natural anomalies.
To really drive this home, the sources make a highly specific and honestly very visceral visual comparison. When standard science looks at certain mountains in Arizona, they just see standard geological formations carved by weather. But the source material asks us to look closer. They directly compare these red, striated rocks to human muscle fiber. Actually, scratch that. It's more like raw meat. The visual similarity they point out is undeniable. They suggest these jagged, reddish mountains don't just look like stone, but closely resemble petrified human flesh and muscle, perfectly preserved in the earth for millions of years. It's a wild thought, right?
All right, Section 3, Massive Artifacts and Relics, the Archaeological Argument.
Think about it. If giants truly existed, they'd inevitably leave behind tools and structures, wouldn't they? Well, the sources introduce a variety of physical artifacts of just staggering scale. The sheer impossibility of normal-sized humans using these items is the whole core of this argument. Just imagine trying to lift a massive, incredibly heavy book that's literally the size of your dining room table, a book a normal person couldn't even budge, let alone flip the pages of. The sources express this really enthusiastic disbelief at these historical anomalies. They cite oversized rings that are completely impossible for a human hand to wear. They also point to bizarre architecture, like giant doors built right next to normal-sized doors. It's as if they were explicitly designed for two vastly different species sharing the exact same building. Or oversized staircases, where a normal human is totally dwarfed by a single step hitting them right at chest height.
To really wrap our heads around the scale we're talking about here, consider the ancient war helmets cited by the source. We aren't talking about helmets that are just a little roomy for extra padding. They are absolutely massive. The sources describe helmets big enough to fit a being whose head is the size of a person who is roughly 5.5 to 6 feet tall. Just picture that for a second. A single piece of headgear the size of a fully grown modern adult, it completely shatters our conventional understanding of ancient warfare.
So, the crucial point is an excavation in Japan, where they allegedly unearthed a 16-foot rod, or axe. The physics of this are brilliantly simple and straightforward. There is absolutely no way a normal human being could ever wield, let alone fight with, a 16-foot solid weapon. Because of this, the source concludes that artifacts like this point directly, and unavoidably, to the historical reality of colossal beings living and fighting wars right here among us.
Which brings us to Section 4, Uncovering Giant Remains, the final proof?
Now, texts, landscapes, and artifacts are one thing, but you're probably wondering, where are the physical bodies? We are now going to explore where the sources claim actual physical remains, the skeletal evidence, of these massive beings have been uncovered. The sources assert the giant remains haven't just been found in one isolated lucky strike, but in abundance all over the world. They specifically highlight China, Nevada in the United States, Mexico, and Ecuador as prime locations where these colossal skeletal remains have been repeatedly discovered. And according to the material, these profound discoveries are subsequently ignored or even deliberately hidden away by mainstream institutions. All of this leaves us with one final, incredibly provocative question. What truly lies hidden at the Nevada coordinates? The source material actually concludes by urging you to look up specific coordinates in Nevada, claiming that this desolate area is the site of the very first major giant remains discovery. They suggest that exploring this location and its history will absolutely blow your mind. It's essentially an invitation from the sources to stop simply taking their word for it, to dive into the research yourself, and to uncover the astonishing truth about these ancient giants. So,